Hello, welcome to our little interview here. We're going to be interviewing Nina Ang from the EMBS department. And yeah, I want you to talk a little bit about aquaponics just as an introduction to what we're going to be discussing.
Yeah, so aquaponics is a form of non conventional agriculture. And some of the benefits of it is that it could be like aquaponic system can be placed like virtually anywhere, assuming that you have the space and like the energy and like required, lights and heating. So it's a really great option for urban spaces that don't have, like farmland because you could put it in a parking garage or in just like an underutilized space. And aquaponics is a combination of aquaculture, which is, farm raised fish, and hydroponics, which is using synthetic nutrients to grow plants. So it's a kind of a more closed loop cycle because the fish, the only input really like in the cycle would be like the energy for lighting and heating and the fish food. And then the fish waste cycles through the system and provides all the nutrients you would need for the plants to grow.
Okay. Um, what other energy requirements are there since you mentioned that? You mentioned heating. Is that just specifically for the fish, or do you also have to heat the plants?
So like in Ithaca, the system's in the CNS greenhouse.
Yeah.
So you need like suitable temperatures for growing plants, obviously.
Mhm.
Depending on what you're growing, you can probably get away with like cooler temperatures with certain kinds of plants, and then you have to heat the water for the fish. Like we keep ours around 80 degrees because we have blue tilapia and they need a little bit warmer water.
What other kinds of fish are you able to use within the system? Because we discussed this a little bit earlier, but you were mentioning like goldfish.
Yeah, so on like home scale systems, people put like whatever kinds of fish they like, goldfish or just kind of like more ornamental fish. Some people have, I've seen systems where people put koi in because koi can be a real money earner because those are expensive fish and you could sell those to people who want to have koi ponds.
Yeah, breeding koi.
Obviously, so like that would not be a form of like food and like
Yeah.
I don't think anybody wants to eat goldfish or koi, but you can put a lot of different kinds of fish and then you just have to adapt the kind of like climate settings to whatever would be ideally suited for the fish.
So you can alter the system just specifically for the fish.
Yeah, like some people put trout in because they like a little bit cooler of water so you wouldn't have to heat it as much. There's all you really could put like a whole different kind of host of fish. If you're interested in like raising them for food, tilapia are very easy. They're pretty resilient. That's what we use at Ithaca, but you could probably raise, like adjusting the conditions, a lot of different kinds of fish.
That's interesting because I always thought it was very limited to like specific kinds of fish. I thought like zebrafish and like a couple others like that were some of the only fish because like they're able to be in very like unique conditions. So I thought it was really set, but it's interesting that it's such a universal thing.
Yeah, so I've seen like some systems like in Louisiana, they raise catfish because that's like a big kind of like food group down there. And then you can also do different kinds of crustaceans. Like some people do cherry shrimp. You could put like langoustine in there or crayfish. So
only freshwater.
Yeah, because you would if you don't do freshwater fish, then you would have to get saltwater tolerant plants because that water is cycling through the system.
I'm trying to think of because there are some plants that just naturally take out the salt, like they desalinize water.
Yeah, but I wouldn't think that those kinds of plants are typically like food plants.
Oh no, I was wondering if you could like combine the effort, sort of.
I think that the salt might be too much for like like we grow a lot of leafy greens and some fruiting plants, and those are not going to be really tolerant of like salinated water.
Okay, that's fair. Can you go into some of the like plants that you can actually grow in the system? Like, can you essentially grow anything?
Um, you would have to adapt your system for more like specific plants. Like we
Okay.
grow like a broccoli, kale, bok choy, Swiss chard, romaine lettuce, like jalapenos, other kinds of hot peppers. We've done cucumbers, tomatoes, a whole variety of herbs. Right now, somebody's growing strawberries in the system.
Oh wow.
I know you can grow like root vegetables, like you could do potatoes and
Yeah.
carrots and things, but you would need to adapt
You need
the
it.
system. It wouldn't. It would be more specialized if you did that.
Is it because it's sort of like not narrow, but the depth isn't very.
Yeah, and also like the water is just flowing through the grow medium. We use clay pebbles called hydroton.
Okay.
So you would need to put like for potatoes, I've looked into this, you'd have to put like buckets that are full of hydroton and then put the potato in, and then it would have to be mature enough that the roots would be able to go into the water, but the potato would not be submerged in the water because that would,
It would drown the potato and cause it to rot.
Yeah, it would rot or it would just collect things on it.
Fair. I never really thought about these things. That's really interesting. So what is one of the main things? Like, can you ever have too much of like fecal matter from the fish? Can like do these things all stay in balance like really easily, or are they thrown out of balance by like a blink of an eye or something? Or
Yeah, so more mature systems are obviously more resilient.
Okay.
So once your system matures, like it will have ideally really like 0 parts per million ammonia and nitrites, and then higher nitrates.
Okay.
Because there's two different kinds of nitrifying bacteria in the system,
Yeah.
which I think are nitrosomoas and nitrobacter.
Okay.
And something that could throw it out of balance is like if a fish dies and then it starts decomposing, there's going to be your ammonia is going to spike at that point. Or if you didn't take care of your plants and then a lot of plants are decomposing and rotting, and that would also cause your ammonia to gradually rise. Not as much as obviously if a fish is decomposing.
So is it primarily ammonia levels that you watch for within the system, or like what other levels are tracked?
So we track pH because plants like a little bit different of pH than the fish. So we try to aim for like a 7 to 8 pH.
Okay.
And then we primarily track nitrogen in the system in the form of ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates.
That makes sense because like that you would want that to be a slightly more basic system.
Yeah, that's more ideally suited for the fish, and more mature systems sit around like 7.6 on the pH scale.
Yeah, that's fair. So you mentioned the using of underused spaces. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so you can use like virtually any indoor space, and it doesn't have to be just like flat spaces. You can stack grow beds, assuming you have the proper lighting. So you could use vertical space as well as horizontal space to grow food and raise the fish, which is a really unique feature of the system because, like if you're in an urban space, you might not have a lot of like floor space, but you might have space to go upwards. So you could have, like a typical grow bed that we use is like a 2x4, so it's 8 square feet of space, but you could stack those as long as you have plants that are a little bit shorter. So if you did like kale or leafy greens, like you can stack them maybe like every 2 to 3 feet and then go upwards.
Can you talk a little bit about what you did with the food pantry with that project? I'm just personally a little curious. I don't know.
Yeah, so my research partner Grace Thomas and I were thinking about like what practical applications we could use our IC aquaponics system for, and there's about 40 square feet of grow space, and we dedicated 40% of that to growing food for the IC food pantry because we did, after obtaining institutional review board approval, we did a bunch of interviews with both the like larger Ithaca, like Tompkins County community, as well as members of like the food security committee on campus to learn about college campuses as food deserts. And what we found was that a lot of college students are actually unable to afford food, you know, because they're prioritizing other costs like their tuition, their textbooks, housing, things like that. So the IC Food Pantry originally started in 2019 as like a pop-up kind of like food truck, like mobile food pantry.
Oh, very
And
interesting.
there would be like 1 to 200 people waiting in line every single week
Oh.
for food. And it became to the point like they was only there for 2 hours, and then people were waiting in line for like a couple hours, and then you know it was over and they still didn't get their food. And then a member of a board at Ithaca College, I can't remember which one, but he heard about this and was really saddened by the fact that so many students were going hungry. So he donated enough money to set up the food pantry, which is located in Campus Center right now.
Yeah.
And so that was like all the refrigeration equipment and all of that, like shelving and the space.
Very
Yeah, so that was really great. And then they've expanded the hours. So right now the food pantry's open, except for Mondays, which is their restock days,
Okay.
all the same times that the Campus Center dining hall is open.
Wow.
So yeah, and we were talking to the coordinator and the managers of the food pantry, and they were saying that since they order their food from the Southern Tier Food Bank, most of it is you know, prepackaged, non-perishable goods, because that's, you know, typically what, you know, when you think of a food drive, that's what they ask you to bring.
Yeah, it's the easiest to preserve, so it's what you need.
Yeah, exactly. But that still leaves like a whole nutritional deficit for like fresh foods.
Okay.
So we decided to grow 4 different varieties of leafy greens, and we donate to the food pantry every 2 weeks. And we grow kale, bok choy, Swiss chard, and broccoli greens for the food pantry. And so far we've donated probably like 60-ish bags of produce, which have 2 to 4 servings in them. So that's like something that we've been doing for not an urban food desert, but a college campus food desert with the system.
How long have you guys been doing this? When did you start implementing that?
We've been working on the project starting in the fall of 2020, but since that was a remote semester, we weren't able to get into the greenhouse and start growing food.
Okay.
So we did all of our informant interviews that semester, and then this semester we started in late January. I got approved to go on campus because I have a paid position with the department, and I started growing the plants. And then by early to mid-March, we started doing the donations.
Damn. So it's been a couple months since you've been donating, and you've gotten a decent bit out there. I'm actually really impressed by that. I didn't know that.
Thanks. Yeah, I was really happy to hear from the food pantry manager that like within 2 days, everything we donate is always gone. So
that's actually really
we weren't
nice
sure
to
if
hear, too.
there would be like a market for it, but there definitely is, and I'm really happy about that.
Yeah. That's really cool. Is there any more elaboration on the actual aquaponics system that you want to go into? Is there anything that you seem like you missed? You mentioned the space, you mentioned the versatility of the different things within it.
Yeah.
You mentioned
one thing that like is like definitely a benefit for the system is that like if it is in a greenhouse, like you can be a little bit more selective if you want to use pesticides, and if you do, there's a little bit less runoff because you're not just spraying open fields.
I didn't even think about that.
Our
I didn't
system
even think about
has,
using pesticides.
Yeah, our system uses like some like obviously like fish safe organic pesticides because we have like a little bit of a pest problem, but we've sprayed maybe 1 time this semester, and then it just, you know, you can't really control what goes in and out of a greenhouse unless you have like a very elaborate setup. But we found that like once you wash the produce, it's pretty much fine.
Okay.
And then so we haven't really been using pesticides much. We have in the past, but not actively currently. And then another benefit is the water use. I think, you know, if you have a pretty like tight system with no leaks, you could probably cut down like growing the same plants, maybe like 80% less water compared to like conventional agriculture.
Oh wow, 80%.
Yeah, up to 80%. Like, we don't always add water to our system. Like, you only really lose water if you have a leak or from evaporation, and a little bit, like, your plants are growing.
Yeah.
So you add water maybe once a week.
Do you need to add water that's specific for the fish? Or do you add it to the other system? Like,
if you're gonna add water directly into like the fish tank, you'd need to use like water conditioners.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
And a dechlorinating chemical.
Yeah.
But if you add water, we have a reservoir tank. And if you add water to the reservoir tank, we have a float valve, so that water only goes into the system once the water level drops in the system to a certain level. So if you put it in there, typically all the chlorine would evaporate off by the time it gets into the system. So you don't have to dechlorinate if you put it into the reservoir. But if you put it directly into the system, you're going to want to dechlorinate the water.
So you always have an active reservoir?
Yeah, we have an active reservoir just so that if there happens to be a leak or, water you don't go in for a couple days, like, and water evaporates off, your water levels don't drop significantly.
That's fair.
Because like those huge blue barrels, the plastic ones, that's the size of our reservoir tank, and we fill it maybe you top it off, you don't even have to fill the whole thing, like maybe once or twice a week.
I'd presume that you don't run through that much water.
And that's a covered tank, so it's not evaporating out of that.
Exactly. You definitely get evaporation from the system. We got to see evaporation in another project that someone was doing within this course. Someone created a closed system using an Arduino board. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but literally just programmed a little board and was reading the pH and temperature of the system. So it was actually really interesting creating something similar, just on a very smaller scale.
And like one of the drawbacks to aquaponics is that the setup cost is fairly high.
That's what I wanted to ask about.
But you can like repurpose a lot of materials for it. And then there are energy inputs, but you can also argue like conventional agriculture has a lot of energy inputs in the form of like chemicals and like machinery.
Do you think there's a lot less chemicals interacted with the system, so it's sort of like cleaner crops?
I mean, you could make it organic very easily because it's in an enclosed space, so there's not like pesticides drifting in from the next field over. And then you put the chemicals that you want or need into the system. And another input would be fish food, which is like fairly energy intensive, but at the same time, like if you're buying fish that are raised in aquaculture, they're also getting that kind of fish food. And you could make your own fish food. I know a few years back, a senior for her honors thesis was experimenting with using Daphnia as a fish food, and that was a sustainable form of fish food because you just feed the Daphnia algae and then you feed the Daphnia to the fish, and it's a bit cleaner. It's just more labor intensive because you have to raise like a significant quantity of Daphnia.
I was gonna say that sounds like flies.
They're like macroscopic.
They're gnats.
They live in water. So they swim. They're not flies.
I swore they were like baby flies or something.
I don't think so.
May be wrong.
But that's like another option if you wanted a sustainable fish food, or I'm sure you could go buy a more sustainable fish food that doesn't have like fish meal in it or something.
That's really interesting though.
Well,
I want to thank Nina. This was an amazing interview. I thank her for spending this time helping me. That's pretty much it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.